So yeah, I've got the thin brows, I've got the blue eyeshadow, I've got the excessive amount of blush. We're here, and you know what that means. You lots know what that means. We're gonna talk about disco music. Hello girls, boys, and ladies. Welcome back to Black Wahala, and today we will be talking about disco music. So you're listening to music on the radio and a certain musician's song, let's say someone like Dua Lipa, and you think to yourself, that sounds a lot like disco music. Then you get to thinking, whatever happened to disco music? Well, stick around and find out how disco music started and how it came to a screeching halt and how disco continues to live on in other musical genres. So, whenever I meet someone who does not like disco music, I'm always thinking, you clearly can't dance, because only someone who cannot dance would dislike disco music. I mean, it's so infectious and fun to dance to. And it turns out I'm not very far off in my connection of disco music to dance, as that was part of its beginnings. In the 1970s, disco was the music of racial and sexual minorities, a club of outsiders apart from the mainstream populace. Disco music did not only sound different from the rock and roll that ruled radio, but it also came from communities that were largely ignored by American society at large. The discotheque, which was a French invention where people danced to recorded pop music, was imported to New York during the 1960s, but it actually quickly faded out. However, the discotheque continued and became particularly important in clubs in New York. In these clubs, discos were brought down to the streets by the DJs in Lower Manhattan and Spanish Harlem. While the DJs spun music and changed the mood on the dance floor, the crowd would dance, the crowd particularly being Black, Latino, and white gay men, and cisgender women in the crowds. As disco music became more prominent, gay political activism flourished, and this transformed gay nightlife and the visibility of gay men, which agitated some people. Underground clubs like the Paradise Garage included crowds consisting mainly of Black, Latino, and white gay men, and Black and other, races of women dancing together. However, because of this visibility, some Americans responded with anti-gay backlash. In 1977, an anti-gay campaign led by Anita Bryant, the campaign was called Save Our Children, they brought on a nationwide backlash. In Anita's 1979 newsletter to her supporters, she warned that homosexuals were producing disco records with double meanings than having straight children buy them.
What the hell?
You can't make this stuff up. Many Americans, especially white middle America, became anxious of their position in society because of the visibility of gay men through disco. Disco music also became a space for cisgender women to express themselves freely and to escape the trappings of society, but this also meant that disco was criticized for being silly music because women were so heavily involved in the scene, as the feminist movement threatened to turn America upside down. Fears of displacement by women through disco music was at the forefront of the minds of disco's critics. Disco was a place for escape for many women, and because disco was all about dancing, this also meant that there were new rules on the dance floor. Women could choose to dance with whomever they wanted, and this disrupted the social relations. And cisgender men, as usual, did not respond in kind. For instance, there were homophobic cartoons about disco in the magazine Punk, which made fun of the fact that women could dance with whomever they wanted. I would suggest y'all take a look at the cartoons from Punk. You can literally still find them freely on the internet. I'll add the link in the description box below. Additionally, the presence of black women in disco music became more prevalent. Female sexual desire became more evident and became a point of contention for disco's public critics, who were mainly white men. Black women like Diana Ross, Donna Summer, and Gloria Gaynor dominated disco charts but were often criticized for their expression of sexual desire in their music. For instance, in an interview on Soul Train, Donna Summer described her song Love to Love You Baby as a song about the urge, while the audience whooped and hollered in the background as she winked at them. These mentions of sexuality in music were controversial for the time, and the black disco divas were criticized for overplaying their sexuality. A Rolling Stone review described Donna Summer as an inflatable sex machine, as insatiable as she was helpless, reducing her music and her persona to a sexual object without agency. However, black women were in control of their sexual desires, all on their own time, and that is something that I don't think those critics could ever take away from them. Have you ever heard of a little old movie called Saturday Night Fever? Saturday Night Fever. The Bee Gees, John Travolta in tight white pants, John Travolta dancing to disco music, and John Travolta winning the disco championship.
I'm sitting on a bad boy piece of information.
So, the movie stars John Travolta as Tony Manero, an Italian working class young man who spends all his weekends dancing at the local discotheque. Unsurprisingly, Saturday Night Fever was completely devoid of the minorities who made disco disco. Disco music moved into the mainstream quite quickly as it was marketed for its escapism, excess, and racelessness. Yes, you heard that right. Racelessness. Marketing disco to any Tom and Becky and moving away from race was meant to assuage the anxieties of those in white America. It was not the music for the minorities anymore. You know, it wasn't the music for the gays anymore. It wasn't the music for the blacks anymore. It was the music for everyone. With Saturday Night Fever, disco was removed from its beginnings because if Tony Manero, a working class white man, could dance in the discotheque, what could stop anyone else? Disco music was hedonistic, yes, but it was also music that everyone could look towards for escape. As cultural critic and historian Alice Echols noted, disco occurred against a backdrop of economic decline as Americans were reduced to driving teeny subcompact cars and bundling up in sweaters to survive the 55-degree temperature of their own homes. I mean, Jimmy Carter's Malay speech, anyone? For some Americans, disco provided a chance to revoke their ordinary lives and ignore the economic difficulties they faced. According to an article by the Washington Post, disco became a $5 billion industry by 1979, flourishing in over 15,000 clubs across the country. This commercial success was dependent on the escapism in disco music. In an article by Lynn Darling for the Washington Post, she stated that disco and its dance culture was perfectly timed to the mannered meaningless of the fashionable, emphasizing the fear Americans had about what the plasticity of disco meant about American society. Disco was then constructed as music that prompted and promoted superficiality and emptiness because of the escapism it provided Americans. Of course. How could I talk about disco without mentioning Studio 54, the brainchild of Steve Rebell and Ian Schrager in 1977? Studio 54 was the club, and you truly had to be there. I mean, the club where Bianca Jagger made an entrance by riding a horse. She claims that she just got on the horse though, but I don't know about that. Or the club that Margaret Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau's wife, and Justin Trudeau's mom loved to dance the night away, or where celebrities like Diana Ross, Elton John, Cher, and Grace Jones frequented. Ugh. Y'all, just imagine meeting any of those celebrities. My mind, I can't. In comparison to underground clubs like the Paradise Garage with crowds of primarily Black and Latino gay men, Studio 54 was a symbol of the commercialization of disco as white Americans became more involved in the scene. So if you look at photographs of crowds at Studio 54, you notice that by the late 1970s, disco crowds demographically changed as more white middle-class Americans became involved in the scene. By the 1980s, the club was shut down after its founders were caught evading their taxes, and it's now a Broadway theater. So, at this point, disco is all the rage, but some people were really not having this. As Alice Echols noted, disco's facelessness, formulaic sound, and unabashed commercialism flew in the face of rock's 10-year-old struggle to recast itself as serious music with artistic merit. Rock fans attempted to exercise their power in this struggle by calling disco music that was glitter and gloss, without substance, subtlety, or more than surface sexuality. So, for example, in a Rolling Stone Correspondence section, I think it was in a 1979 issue, rock fans criticized the magazine for placing the Village People, yes, the Village People, on the front cover of an earlier issue, with one rock fan claiming that he'd rather have malaria than have disco fever.
No, my bad, I'm sorry.
The hatred for disco by rock fans was no joke, y'all. The hatred also had a lot to do with toxic masculinity, as many rock fans felt that a real man in 1979 found his music at album-oriented rock arena concerts, adhered to a jeans and t-shirt dress code, and only listened to rock music. Another rock fan wrote about how amusing the last issue with the Village People was, because he believed that it was an April Fool's issue, because for a moment he really thought they were serious. In the anti-disco cartoon from the 1979 issue of Punk, rock fans continued to mock disco for being the music of gay men and women. Illustrations like those in Punk, as Frank Rose observed, also showed that rock fans' disparaging characterization of disco as music for gay people seemed linked to their perception that it didn't have je ne sais quoi balls. Because rock music had become synonymous with masculinity and strength, music like disco was considered weak and feminine. The gay men who were primarily involved in the scene were ridiculed as rock fans attempted to assert their masculinity. This hatred culminated into what is often called Disco Demolition Night. On Thursday, July 12, 1979, over 70,000 people met at Comiskey Park in Chicago for a baseball game. Many of those in attendance did not come to watch the game. Rather, they were there to watch the planned destruction of disco records during the intermission of the game. This event, billed as Disco Demolition Night, was spearheaded by a DJ named Steve Dahl, who worked at WLUP-FM 98, which was a rock radio station that had begun playing disco records because of the popularity of disco. And Steve did not like this. He really had a problem with disco music. So the event began with Steve Dahl saying to the crowd that they were going to take all the disco records that the crowd brought, and that he had a giant box and they would blow them up real good. Steve Dahl then led the crowd with a chant of "Disco sucks" and "Go home" for several minutes, and then they blew up the records.
I suppose I should have anticipated this, but nothing has ever given any indication of it. We had rock concerts in which we didn't have this many people.
50,000 people got in before the White Sox called upon Chicago police to help close the gates. Didn't take long for the realization to set in that rock fans under the influence of beer and drugs and armed with disco records they had been invited to destroy don't mix with baseball. There was trouble almost from the start. Tiger outfielder Ron LaFleur saying,
"Without a doubt, it was the worst conditions I've ever played in. You know, I was in Detroit opening day, and they threw about 5 bottles at me, but they were throwing golf balls out there. On one play that I made in left center field, I caught a ball, and golf ball went right between my legs as the ball was going into my glove. And I looked down there, it was a golf ball. I thought it was a piece of paper or something. Then there was a few bottles thrown out there, and then records was zooming by everywhere. I mean, record came by my head, one stuck right back behind my foot."
Even the White Sox outfielders were wearing batting helmets. The White Sox lost the game 4-1. Then came the main event. A crate of disco records was blown up in center field, at which time an estimated 7,000 people ran onto the field. The unruly fans left the field scarred with burned and torn-up turf, at which point the umpires called the second game, saying the field was unplayable. Bill Veeck disagreed.
Well, I felt that it was playable, and I felt that the people would behave and would stay off the field, and there would be no further incidents. They didn't agree with me, and they said the field was unplayable. I do not agree with that either. I would suggest that everyone go out and look at the field and decide for themselves whether it's unplayable or not.
The field probably was playable, but whether or not there would have been further incidents is open to conjecture. Ken Kravick was to have pitched that second game.
When I talked to the other players, the majority was that they didn't want to play because, you know, you're more or less, the safety of yourself was in your hands. I went down to the bullpen originally to start warming up for the second game, and I was very conscious of getting hit with something. As I warmed up, there were shoes being thrown out in between me and Schuler as I was warming up. Firecrackers, records were, and my concentration was just nothing.
Yet Veeck saw no reason not to continue.
I didn't feel that there was, that the players were endangered. I wouldn't want to play.
Well, it's pretty hard to sympathize with Veeck. He says the fans who rioted were not true baseball fans, and that's the problem. The White Sox are inviting trouble by catering to an audience not interested in baseball. The fans who rioted didn't come to see the White Sox or Detroit. They came to do their thing, and they did, at the expense of the White Sox, the Detroit Tigers, and the city of Chicago.
Afterwards, mayhem ensued as the fans rushed to the stadium with 4 fans being injured while 40 were arrested. Even though Steve Dahl doesn't claim responsibility for what happened, and many of the participants of, in my opinion, many of the participants of the riots claim that it was never meant to be some homophobic or racist thing. I think sometimes we do things unconsciously, and to me, this was both a conscious and an unconscious, showing of homophobia and racism. Because apparently, even some of the records that they were burning weren't disco records, they were R&B or soul records. So, This violent backlash further stigmatized disco because immediately after the riot, rock radio DJs imitated Dahl's anti-disco actions. 60 radio stations were galvanized against disco within a week, putting an end to disco's reign on the airwaves. If you actually want to learn more about Disco Demolition Night, Red Bull's show The Note did a very interesting episode about it. It's about 15 minutes long. I will link it in the description box below. I would suggest checking it out too if you want to see some actual footage and learn more about the people involved. So, by the end of the summer of 1979, disco was over. Obviously, a music genre truly never ends or begins in unison or neatly within a decade, as some musicians were still producing disco records after 1979 and well into the, I would say, very, very early 1980s, so probably well into 1980. But by the early 1980s, the phenomenon that was disco was essentially over. However, I'm here to tell you that disco lived on as it returned underground as house music. Interestingly enough, house music went through a similar commercialization / whitewashing process as disco did, but that's another video for another time. Thank you for watching. I really enjoyed making this video and researching for this video. I also really enjoyed putting on some makeup and, you know, doing some 70s makeup. You know, I put foundation on my brow so that it could be thinner, and then I'm wearing like blue eyeshadow, and you know, I'm really going for the bleached out wrong foundation look that you see in so many pictures from the 1970s of black celebrities. Follow me on Twitter at Black Wahala. It is where I am the most active. You can also follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Black Wahala, but I'm not as active on those platforms, but I post every now and then. Please share the video and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Pretty please do. Hi everyone, this is Black Wahala. As I'm editing this video, I'm realizing this video will be coming out fairly late in December. Well, later than I hoped it would be. And so I wanted to ask you, my followers, if you have any ideas of what you want me to talk about this Christmas. Last year, I talked about Hallmark movies and the love for Hallmark movies. So if you want me to talk about something similar, or you have any ideas that you'd like me to do for this Christmas, please let me know in the comments as well. I really want to talk about something Christmas themed and have the video out at least by Christmas. So do that. Thanks. And let me know what you think of disco music and its end in the comments. Did you know about disco music and why it ended? Let me know. And let's keep the convo going in the comments. All right. Bye.